Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day, but as you can see, I did not go to my LCS today. Instead, I went to somebody else's LCS. I'm up at Little Farmhouse in Vermont, and we went to a different comic shop. And I went with a plan, which is always a bad idea. I went with a plan. I look at comic listings ahead of time to see what's coming out the next day, just so I know what to look for, and I also know whether or not it's worthwhile to make the trip at all. And there was an item that I kind of sort of wanted, and it wasn't at this local comic shop, but I still have stuff to talk to you about, because I not only went to this comic shop, I also found bargain graphic novels at a bookstore. So I'm just lumping them all together here. And it's all real, good, interesting superhero comics, and also a Marvel comic. I also got a Marvel comic, because we saw on this channel, Marvel is doing, their writer, Chip Zdarsky, is doing a sort of a contained miniseries that follows Peter Parker, follows Spider-Man through real time, instead of the kind of suspended time that superhero comics do, where, in the 1960s, Peter Parker is a high school student, then he graduates and goes to college, and then he graduates college and sort of stays there for forever. This series is called Spider-Man Life Story, and the second issue came out today, and it's the 1970s. Last one was the 1960s, where we saw Flash Thompson put on a uniform and go to Vietnam. And we also saw Captain America conflicted about whether or not to support the war in Vietnam. And that issue ended with a cliffhanger. And when I read that issue, I thought, well, okay, you're promising that the next issue is going to be the 1970s, but you're ending this issue with a cliffhanger. How can that happen? And I thought there were two possibilities for how that could be resolved. One, Chip Zdarsky, the writer, resolves the cliffhanger and moves the action forward. That would be the competent way. And the other way I thought would be possible is if Chip Zdarsky is incompetent, the opposite of competent, and just doesn't care about the cliffhanger and just moves the story on anyway. And it was the second one. It was incompetent, because this is Marvel instead of DC. But nevertheless, I am interested. I haven't read this issue yet, but I am interested. I'm going to give this maybe one more. I'll read maybe the first three issues, and if they captivate me, the first issue I really liked. The lingo, the period lingo, was very clearly written by someone who had not yet been even remotely conceived in the 1960s. I'd be willing to bet that Chip Zdarsky's parents were either little children in the 1960s. So the lingo didn't work. But it was great. It's Mark Bagley artwork, and he's fantastic. And the pacing of the issue was really good. The writing otherwise was really good. So I have high hopes for this thing. But that's the only Marvel that we need to talk about. All the rest is real comics. And the next thing I want to show you is also relatively new, and it doesn't get any realer. It doesn't get any realer than this. This is a one-shot DC square-bound Superman comic called Man and Superman. It was $10. It's absolutely lovely. I don't know if you can make it out on the camera there, but you have the Superman symbol. You have the Daily Planet, and on the bottom, rushing in that direction through cornfields, we do not have Superman. We have the shadow of Superman and the motion lines. That's really neat. I kind of like that. And this is written by the legendary Marv Wolfman, who doesn't get work anymore in comics. He's a fantastic storyteller. I don't know why. And it's drawn. I'm never going to get the guy's name right, but I have watched his work. I have seen his work in other things, and he is incredible. Like John Buscema at the peak of his game. Just classic anatomy, classic composition and action sequences, classic design, everything. His name, let me get his name for you. Claudio Castellini is his name. And this is an anomaly. For all I know, in fact, I think I might have heard a rumor that this was written and drawn, finished completely, years and years ago. But it could not be done until now. DC, only a little while ago, did a company-wide reboot of all of their major characters, including Superman. And he came out the other end of it with a different personality, a different costume, a different origin. None of the classic stuff applied. This is classic Superman. It's Lois Lane, who doesn't know his identity. It's Ma and Pa Kent, who raised him as a child in Smallville. It's Perry White and the Daily Planet. It's a bald and thoroughly evil Lex Luthor. It's all the hallmarks that were true about Superman for the better part of 50 years. So for a long time, if those rumors are true, I'll have to look into it, but if those rumors are true and this was done a long time ago, it couldn't have been done. DC wouldn't have run it because it wouldn't have been their Superman. But now, painstakingly, DC did what I predicted they would do when they did that company reboot. You don't reinvent the wheel. No one out there in the audience that doesn't know anything about comic books is going to recognize or care about a Superman who's wearing a blue unitard with a popped collar. No one's going to care about that person. And if they probe a little deeper and realize that in addition to the Nehru collar, he's also a jerk, they're not going to buy the comic. That's not Superman. Superman is an archival character. He is a comic book piece of folklore. You can't change him. You can't change him. You can't change Batman. You can't change Wonder Woman. You can't do it. And I knew when DC did that they would gradually move him back towards the real Superman. Red shorts on the outside, big red cape, spit curl on the forehead, totally a Boy Scout. No cynicism, no sarcasm. These things have a way, they have sort of a physics way of getting back to their basic function. I went through this, you're an old enough comics fan, you're going to see this. I went through this once before with the writer and artist John Byrne, who was, back in the 1980s, given a free rein by DC Comics to remake Superman, and he did. And back then, I knew, sure as shooting, the character would come back to classic. The character has now come back to classic, and that's what this is. So, again, I haven't read it, but I want to show you, there's one scene that just to give you a glimpse of just how beautiful this is. For instance, here's a close-up of Lois Lane. Look at that. That is just wonderful. Classic anatomy. But these great cityscapes that are drawn, they're not done with computer programs. They're drawn. And there's another one. There's a little thing in here I wanted to show you. Yes, right. Okay. This is really well done in terms of dramatic presentation. The Superman we're seeing here, I'm assuming that the reason he looks this way is because he's very young, but I think you'll agree with me that he's also fabulous. I grew up with Kurt Swan's Superman, who was a stately granite high school gym teacher. So that kind of Superman, I don't know, but I can't wait, because I waited a long time through the New 52 and the relaunch and all of that reconceptioning. I waited a long time. Superman is my favorite comic book character, and I knew perfectly well that DC would eventually bring him back to normal, and that I would just have to wait for it. And sure enough, I had to wait, and I finally got it. And they did. I knew they were going to do the same thing. They did the same thing with Wonder Woman. They changed her completely, and I knew the minute they did that they would have to change her back. They would have to change her back. They changed her into a clamshell-wearing Conan the Barbarian, hail and well met, 'tis fine day for battle, sword and sorcery character. That's not Wonder Woman. That has none of the grandeur of Wonder Woman, none of the mythological elegance of Wonder Woman, and now she has, if you look at the Justice League now, you're seeing the real Wonder Woman, the real Superman. Batman they don't ever screw with, obviously. But anyway, those were the two comics that I got from the comic shop. But when I went to a bookstore, I also found some bargains, and they thrilled me. I wasn't expecting them, and they're amazing. The first one, they're both DC. They're both DC compilation volumes. And the first one is Crisis on Multiple Earths, Volume 4. This is what it looks like. I'm going to make it out of the light. You really should be able to see the details of this, because this is Alex Ross at his best. That is Superman and Captain Marvel squaring off. And in the background, you will see all sorts of characters. The more you know about comics, the more you will nod in recognition. The character, for instance, right square in the middle of the comic is Captain Marvel Jr. But up here, some of you who know comics will recognize those characters. That is, of course, my beloved Legion of Superheroes. The reason this is number 4 is because, well, mainly because of a guy named Julius Schwartz, who a long time ago in DC history oversaw the revision of the sort of revamping of the DC comic book line. It wasn't just him. There were a whole bunch of other figures involved. But all of a sudden DC thought, well, you know, back in the 1940s we had a character named Green Lantern. And he had a ring that produced green energy constructs. What if we updated him? This is the swinging 60s. This is the late 60s, early 70s. Let's update him. So let's, instead of him having an enormous cape with a big Dracula collar, and instead we'll give him a skin-tight green leotard. And instead of making him a one-of-a-kind magic ring, we'll make him a member of the Green Lantern Corps. We'll bring in science fiction. And DC did that with Green Lantern, and they did that with the Atom, and they did that with the Flash, and they did it with a bunch of other people, and they didn't really think about the fact that a lot of these redesigns weren't anything like the original with that name. They didn't really think anything of it because, I think, when they originally did it, they were thinking nobody cares about those old characters, no one remembers. And that was wrong, because geeks never forget. They don't have anything else in their lives. And so, almost immediately, you had people saying, well, wait a minute. This Green Lantern, for instance, I'm just picking on Green Lantern, but you know what I mean. This Green Lantern is a guy named Hal Jordan. The old Green Lantern was a guy named Alan Scott. This Green Lantern is a test pilot. The old Green Lantern owned a radio station. Well, they obviously aren't the same person. It's not an update. You redid the character. And that made people wonder how that could be. In comics continuity, how could that be? And Julia Schwartz and a couple of other people had two choices for how to explain that. They had a good choice and a bad choice. The good choice, the self-evident choice, was that those previous versions of characters were, say it with me now, previous versions of the characters. Those characters fought during World War II. It's no longer World War II. We have new characters picking up the mantle of those old characters. That would have been the perfect explanation. That's not the explanation they went with. Instead, they went with this explanation. Parallel Earths, alternate realities. A whole smorgasbord of them. A different parallel Earth for anything you want to do. Never thinking, of course, long-term comic books, your nose is to the grindstone. You've got a monthly deadline you have to meet months in advance, so you can't plan long-term. They never thought what a headache that would be down the line. So that's what this means. This is the Justice League of the Justice League's Earth, the Earth of Hal Jordan and Ray Palmer and all the newer versions of characters meeting, crossing the dimensional barrier and meeting those original versions of the same characters. But it stick with me here. It turns out that if you have an alternate Earth in which Superman is rocketed to planet Earth in the 1930s, and his name is Kal dash the letter L instead of EL, and he works for the Daily Star, not the Daily Planet, or anything like that. Alan Scott, all these original characters. It turns out that if you make an alternate world in which they exist, well, time is moving on in that alternate world the same way as it's moving on in the world of your present-day comic books. And maybe there are new generations of characters being born and coming to light in those alternate worlds, and then it becomes a mess. And that's why there are 4 volumes, and there might have even been more. This series might have gone on to two or three more volumes, because the Justice League comic book, the writers started thinking, well, what if one reality's Justice League? What if the Justice League teamed up with the Justice Society, the Justice League of that alternate Earth? Wouldn't that be fun? And boy, it was. And fans loved it. Loved it. And this was back in a time when if fans really loved something, the comic book creators did more of that something. So there were many crossovers, many events like that. And this issue, these are the individual covers of a lot of those issues. And a lot of you won't, I'm thinking probably most of you weren't around when these comics were done. So you won't realize this comic, for instance, the one that is commemorated on Alex Ross's cover, Superman squaring off against Captain Marvel, comics fans were baffled by that. Just blind-struck with love for that idea. Doesn't really work the way you would hope it does in the issue. For a knockdown, drag-out, slam-bam fight between Superman and Captain Marvel, you have to wait for the comic book, the cartoon, Justice League Unlimited, in which there is an episode where Superman and Captain Marvel actually do square off. And you have to do that in a cartoon. It doesn't work well in the comics. But there's another thing. You can't make it out in these little thumbnails, but there's another thing that is kind of amazing that happened in these crossovers. And it's this cover right here, because you see the leagues, both of them, the Justice League and the Justice Society, running towards this supervillain. We see him in the back. You see him from the back. And the advanced copy for this issue said, "You will never guess the identity of this villain. And boy, oh boy, you would not have guessed the identity of this villain, because that was the very first time that anything like that had ever been done in a comic book. I'm not going to spoil it, because you might come across these issues. But this is tremendous fun, and this was dirt cheap. What was this? $5. $5 for this thing. With Alex Ross cover and great reprints of stuff that I love. I know already that I love it. So I was very happy to see it. And that's nothing compared to how happy I was to find this next one. This is also DC. This is Superman versus Mongul. That enormous yellow-skinned creature is Mongul. That's him on the back there. And he was a creation of the writer Jim Starlin, who had a very simple idea. He thought Mongul up in response to a very simple idea when it comes to Superman. What if we had a Superman villain who is as strong as he is or stronger? What would happen then? And he added a lot more to Mongul, made him an intergalactic warlord, all sorts of stuff like that. But right from the beginning, this villain was treated a little differently than other Superman villains, a little better. More of a serious threat, not so much something that Superman can handle in a dawdle in an afternoon, or someone who would have to rely, for instance, on kryptonite, like so many other Superman villains did. And he kept reappearing, especially when Jim Starlin would draw him. Those were always wonderful. Those occurred in Superman's team-up book, DC Presents, where Superman every month would team up with a different character, and sometimes, due to fan demand, Mongul would be the villain. And this collects all of those, including an issue where the team-up is with Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, and it's drawn by Curt Swan. Now, that is not a Mongul 2 character spec. That's not how big the character is. That's not really what he looks like. But who cares? If you're getting the Legion of Superheroes drawn by Curt Swan, in probably one of the last times that he ever did it, then who cares? I had no idea that issue had ever been collected in a book. And this has all the other Mongul appearances, and the thing that really made me squeal, the thing that really pushed me over the top to pay the princely $6 price tag on this thing, was that the collection ends with, let me get you the total here, the cover. The collection ends with one of the greatest Superman comics ever done, for the man who has everything. Also where Mongul is the villain, and those of you who know comics, who've been maybe reading Superman anthologies, will instantly know what I mean. Also, it was made into one of the greatest Justice League cartoon episodes of all time, because it's an endlessly perfect story. It is just a perfect story. It's by Alan Moore, who I think has a few dogs barking in his backyard, if you know what I mean. But he thought it up as a Superman annual, and it's amazing. Just amazing. Where instead of using his fists, Mongul uses a thing, an alien creature, that latches onto a person and provides them with their dream come true. It makes them live in their dream reality so that they don't want to leave it. And it just so happens by coincidence that Wonder Woman, Batman, and Robin appear at the Fortress of Solitude right after Superman has had this thing attached to him. So they know there's something going on, and it's just... It's been reprinted a million times. It's been adapted for a comic book. If anybody had any sense, it would be adapted for the screen. It is just wonderful. And it's in here. So I get not only all of those Jim Starlin issues, and not only Curt Swan drawing the Legion of Superheroes, but also For the Man Who Has Everything, all in one volume for $6. So those are my comics for today, and they were a hit. The two graphic novels, I know every inch of what's in these, and I can't wait to reread them. And then there are these two things that I have a feeling that I am just going to love. Classic Superman, written by Marv Wolfman, I mean, for God's sake. And Spider-Man life story, this will be interesting enough in its way. I have a feeling that this is not going to be just brilliant enough to keep me reading to the whole thing. I don't think I'll make this all the way to the aughts. And I am curious to see, I don't know that I'll be reading it that far, but one of the signature moments in Spider-Man, in Marvel Comics, was the Spider-Man issue that appeared directly after 9/11, that had a black cover, and that opens with Spider-Man looking down at the building still on fire at Ground Zero, and all the Marvel heroes are there pitching in to help get people out of the rubble. It was before Bush went to Congress and got a war. It was before an invasion of any kind. It was as immediate as you could get in a comic book, and that was real-world history directly entering into a Spider-Man comic. So what's going to happen maybe this issue will just take the tactful approach and not go that far into history. What's going to how can you possibly beat that issue with John Romita Jr. artwork? And how would you change? It seems almost sacrilegious. We now know what Spider-Man's reaction to 9/11 was. It would seem sacrilegious to do that over. Maybe this series just won't get that far. I have a feeling, though, that after this, or maybe the next issue, I will just wait and buy the trade paperback. So there you go. Sorry for the length on here, but that was my comic book day. A more active comic book day than usual. Didn't get the one thing that I was kind of hoping for, but that's more than made up for by these two things. Good Lord. I'm going to have so much fun rereading these. So, but anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. But I will be back, believe it or not, location or not. We have plenty more stuff to talk about. So I'll see you soon. Thank you.